Hey guys, welcome back. For those of you who have been checking out my Star Rail content, you'll know my main series for that is currently sort of like a first impression on new characters, and I've been having a pretty fun time making them, so I figured we could give it a try for Genshin as well, seeing as that's the main game on this channel. Fontaine has opened up with a very interesting 5-star in the form of Linny, who while not quite strong enough to join the ranks of the top tiers, commands enough attention and results to be more than a worthwhile off-meta strategy, quote-unquote. We just got introduced to Neuvillette and Riosley. Hi everyone, this is post-editing Jin. I just wanted to apologize for making you cringe and die inside. It's not actually pronounced Riosley, it's pronounced Risley, so I promise I will never make that pronunciation mistake ever again. And yeah, let's just get back to the video. As the runners of 4.1, and they're also trying something interesting for their respective elements. Given that Neuvillette is coming out first, I want to cover him for this video. So we'll be going over his abilities, playstyle, and then I'll give my thoughts and impressions on his design. As sort of a side promotion, I actually have a special code for anyone who clicked on this video, so here it is on screen. Hope you enjoy it. Be sure to redeem it before the time frame expires. But without further ado, let's get on with the video. As made very clear by the first 3 playable 5-stars of Fontaine, version 4 appears to be the era of exploration. Not overworld exploration, but rather character exploration. While the game has always toyed around with unique movesets and playstyles, characters have for the most part been archetypal in function, adhering to the established conventions of their respective elements. For example, the bulk of the Hydro roster consists primarily of supportive units like Nilu, Kokomi, Xingqiu, and Yela, with only 2 members straying from that path. While there have been plenty of instances where new characters took a different approach to their elements, it was often met with poor reception on account of said units lacking sufficient numbers and concessions to make up for their divergent playstyles. Xinyan, Toma, Chongyun, Candice, even some 5-stars like Dia. Although on the subject of Dia, it looks like circumstances may be improving for her. But regardless, Mihoyo seems to be learning from their past experiences given how considerate they were towards Linny and his power scaling. As mentioned earlier, Hydro's whole gimmick is to drive reactions, evidenced by its involvement in virtually every high-profile reaction in the game. Even his 2 main damage dealers, Child and Ayato, demonstrate that power through application and driving, not exclusively personal DPS, though that isn't to say they can't deal their fair share of damage. As the 3rd Hydro main damage dealer, Neuvillette's unique approach to this dynamic is less on reaction support and more on personal DPS. A lot more on personal DPS. So if we were to create a spectrum from supporty to damagey, it would look something like this. This makes him basically the first true Hydro Hypercarry in Genshin Impact, which is funny because in my video on mono elemental teams I said Hydro would be the least likely to have a Hypercarry unit due to its synergistic nature. Looking through his abilities, there's definitely a greater focus on his own power, with any reactions being more of an additive. His normal attack has a special supercharge attack, taking a decently long time to power up, although conveniently you can move and change your direction while charging, so despite being a catalyst user, he essentially has a bow aim shot if you want to think about it that way. Upon full charge, he pretty much has an Aurelian Soul Q for all you League players out there. For those who are mentally adjusted enough to not play that game, it's a giant stream of water that damages all enemies in the line of fire for 3 seconds, and while he's above half HP, he continuously loses HP. So I guess the trend of self-damage will be permeating Fontaine's characters going forward. All the more reason to use Kokomi, never a bad thing. I just want to say, I'm really thankful that they let you move while charging and casting this attack, since being stationary is a huge con versus a ton of bosses who run around all over the place. Nothing is more disappointing than setting up your entire rotation only for the boss to yeet itself across the other side of the map. Appreciate the quality of life. Neuvillette's Hydro Pump, which I'll be calling it, is the centerpiece of his kit, as his elemental skill and burst, in addition to dealing respectable damage themselves, have mechanics that enable him to not only sustain the health cost to use his ability, but also increase the uptime of this move, and it does a massive amount of damage at that. On its own, the HP scaling of this attack is without question a force to be reckoned with, but one of his Ascension passives, Heir to the Ancient Sea's authority, makes it so upon triggering 3 separate Hydro-related elemental reactions, his Hydro Pump damage increases even further. This is also what distinguishes himself as a genuine Hypercarry compared to Child and Ayato. All holistic aspects of the element are meant to serve his own personal damage as opposed to his damage serving the element, so it's in reverse basically. Once again, we're seeing the kind of power afforded to these so-called off-meta characters. Linny's conclusive ovation allows them up to 100% bonus pyro damage to account for the absence of either vaporize or melt, while Neuvillette is getting up to 60% bonus damage on Hydro Pump, which already has a serviceable baseline. Technically, he can make use of Hydro reactions and it's even encouraged, but in his situation, reactions are a means to his own end instead of the end itself. Speaking of damage boosting, let's take a look at his other Ascension passive. While above 30% HP, he gains bonus Hydro damage for free, effectively making him the inverse of Hu Tao. Hu Tao wants to stay below a certain threshold to gain bonus damage, disincentivizing any form of healing as that would be counterproductive, whereas for Neuvillette, you want to stay above 80% max HP at all times to get the full 30% bonus damage. So maybe his Hydro Pump is more akin to Water Spout since it does more damage the higher your health is, but whatever, Hydro Pump sounds cooler. Fortunately, just like how Linny has a way to supplement his own HP consumption, Neuvillette has one as well. Using either a skill or burst, he sets down droplets of tap water, source water. Picking these up will not only restore a measurable amount of health, but also accelerate the charge time of Hydro Pump. In other words, between streams of water, you want to use your skill and burst to scatter source water droplets, then pick them up to both spam Hydro Pump left and right while recovering the health you lost. So if you're a fan of giant laser beams or Dragon Ball Z, you'll feel right at home with this kind of playstyle. A bit repetitive, but that's made up for by the very satisfying animations and great DPS. Suffice to say, Neuvillette's all damage. There's not much else to say about him. All three of his abilities are damage-oriented, passives are damage-oriented, and even his constellations are damage-oriented. But that's actually a breath of fresh air for the Hydro element. Hydro has quickly made a name for itself as the strongest element in the game, not for its power, but for its versatility and necessity. And though I, like many of you, am a Hydro enthusiast, it would be nice to let them be the prima donna of the team every now and then. And I can't think of any better way than to shoot giant laser beams of water. That said, I like that they're aware of the strengths of Hydro and incorporate that into his kit. A constant issue with most off-meta units, quote-unquote, is the complete lack of understanding on the designer's part of how to tap into the strength of their element, resulting in situations where a good idea is hamstrung by terrible execution. For example, Dia, at least prior to version 4, was complete trash because their power is split amongst two mutually exclusive stats, health and attack, and not enough of either. I know some of you may ask, but what about Hu Tao? Hu Tao is also a health scaler, but that HP directly turns into attack, whereas Dia is just deriving off both. Secondly, her moveset disqualifies her from being able to utilize Pyro's full power as she spends too much of her power budget being a cover tank, which goes against Pyro being the main source of damage in almost every team it's involved in besides Burgeon. Neuvillette goes against the prevailing wisdom of Hydro being the supportive element, but still takes Hydro's strengths into consideration. For one, HP scaling is way more conducive in a Hydro setting thanks to many of its units working off of that, and of course Hydro Resonance giving bonus health. Secondly, Hydro intermingles with every other element in the game, and so they directly tied his own damage output to those reactions by giving him just as much application as the rest of them, but not hinging that damage on said reactions, making him far more intuitive to play and strategize around than Dia, whose abilities contradict the very thing Pyro is known for, raw power. To give you an idea of the seamlessness of Neuvillette in concept, despite being a hypercarry, in any team where there isn't a dedicated teammate running point, you can put him in and he can achieve just about any reaction you want. Now whether or not he can do it efficiently is another matter entirely, but the option is there, which is what matters. He can theoretically pull off freeze, vaporize, bloom, etc., but a concern I do have for him is how it isn't quite as free range as it looks. True to his status as a hypercarry, Neuvillette's among the most time-consuming units in the game since you have to run through several rotations of Hydro Pump at a time. This can restrict the characters you want to run with him, as even those who could theoretically do very nicely, like Bennett for the HP recovery, can't sustain their effects for that long. Speaking of Bennett, while the persistent regeneration sounds like a no-brainer for Neuvillette, Hydro Pump only scales off HP, so like Yelan, the attack buff is lost entirely on him. The HP condition isn't all that intrusive for Yelan given that she's an off-fielder, but as an on-fielder that might constrain who you can and can't use sufficiently. Moreover, he is the charge attacker, which means you can't use anything that follows up off normal attacks. Additionally, because his charge attack behaves like a bow aim shot, that means you have to also be aware of his vulnerability to getting staggered, requiring some form of super armor or interruption resistance. And lest you forget, there's a DPS condition associated with this passive taunt, requiring you to set off at least 3 Hydro-based reactions to achieve that 1.6 amp on Hydro Pump. Ordinarily, that's not in tall order by any means as mentioned earlier. It's almost, if not flat out impossible, to not pull off a Hydro reaction. But with all those other conditions, the only team that can realistically take care of all of his needs without compromising in damage or ease of use is Taser. Taser automatically checks off 2 reactions, Swirl and Electrocharge, both of which require only application, not damage or permutation. Fischl is one of the few characters who can pull off a 24-second rotation. At present, Kazuha is the only support who can directly boost Neuvillette's damage through his passive taunt. Elemental Mastery from Nahida or Sucrose might help a little, but again the bulk of his DPS comes from himself, and with only HP scaling, all you have is Kazuha. Technically, Yelan's damage amp works too, but we just went over how he can't activate a death clearing dice because he does a normal attack, so even she won't work with him. Shogun's another Electro unit who can sustain his field time quite easily, but once more, she buffs elemental burst damage, not charge attack damage, so it's literally just Kazuha. And finally, to alleviate that stagger issue, we can throw in the old reliable Geodaddy Zhongli, whose shield gives you all the super armor you need, has permanent uptime especially with C2, and the resist shred is always appreciated. This is the team the Genshin community has colloquially decided on what would be standard for him. Not saying that's his only team, it's just the only one that can comfortably check off every box without compromising efficiency. Electrocharge, Swirl, and Crystallize are the easiest to consistently pull off with the characters we're talking about. All that is to say, Neuvillette's kind of a needy guy if you want to go the full distance with him. The way they balance his passive is that you get 10% from 1 reaction, 25% from 2, and 60% from 3, so you really want to get that third reaction for optimal damage. Now there is one way to circumvent that reaction, Constellation 1. I love a C1 because it's exactly how I believe what purposes constellations should fulfill: quality of life. Constellation 1 lowers the reaction threshold to achieve the full power of his passive from 3 to 2, enabling you a lot more freedom and legroom in team composition. With this, he goes from being somewhat restrictive to extremely easy to fit into any team that can afford a Hydro on fielder. Plus, he gets complete super armor while charging Hydro Pulse, so you can swap out Zhongli for basically anyone you want, like say, Kokomi to get more healing and that juicy Hydro Resonance, or you can even go Nilo Bloom if you want. Although that's only one reaction, so you still miss out on a bit of damage, but whatever, you get the idea. I like this because you can still conceivably reach the full extent of Neuvillette's power at C0. It's just C1 makes it a bit comfier as opposed to other units whose constellations really should be part of their base kit due to feeling so much worse to play without it. Although I should clarify that you don't need C1 and Neuvillette even for comfort reasons. His baseline damage output is just so good that provided the rest of your team is sufficiently geared up, you can do a serious amount of damage with only 2 stacks of his passive talent. His damage floor is more than good for free-to-play players, while ultra sweaty gamer whales can sink their teeth into his enormous damage ceiling for some pretty impressive speedruns, I'd figure. One last thing I want to mention is the point about Kazuha being his only real support. We still don't have Farina yet, and with how stacked the Hydro roster is, plus the fact that Fontaine's really driving home the theme of HP consumption, I'm willing to bet my secret curry recipe that she will indubitably synergize the Neuvillette. Remember, I don't pay attention to leaves. That leaves us with one more slot left. Point being, this guy is extremely strong with the unoptimized teammates we have right now, but he can get even stronger as we unlock more specialized units. Alongside Linny, this guy definitely sets a convincing precedent on a potential new Hypercarry meta. Damage-wise, he far eclipses the Hypercarries of the previous generation, which is awesome. I'm glad that Mihoyo is finally making an effort to try different strategies and teams that are on par, if not better than existing ones. Obviously, this will elevate our expectations on characters, which will inevitably call power creep into question, but at this point we're due for some kind of push in that direction anyway. I feel like a lot of units in this game are neglected or unacknowledged, not because they have bad designs, but because Mihoyo is afraid to give them a big power budget. Sad as it may sound, gacha games kind of depend on power creep to survive. We spend money on characters, so to incentivize to go after new characters, they have to be more enticing for players to spend more money on the game. The community was visibly upset with how disappointing Dio was, or how underwhelming the Hydro Travel is, which means it's probably better for Mihoyo to err on the side of characters being too strong rather than too weak. Neuvillette has ostensibly the perfect balance of that. Again, this is all on paper, we haven't fully tested him out, but from what the community has surmised, he's gonna be around child national levels of strong at worst. Not a bad start for someone who still has a ton of room to grow, and I like that he's not stepping over anyone's toes either. Calling back the spectrum thing I talked about earlier, Ayato Child and Neuvillette have their own playstyles, strengths, and weaknesses. He doesn't invalidate the existing 2 Hydro carries because he specs fully into solo Hypercarry, whereas the other 2 are more team-centric. It's a healthy combination of strong but not too strong to where it invalidates the others. If anything, his main purpose, similarly to Child and Ayato, is to lighten the load on Xingqiu, Yelan, and Kokomi by filling in for them, but as on-fielders. That about wraps up my assessment of Neuvillette. TLDR, big giant water laser, instant 10 out of 10. Everyone enjoys lasers, let's be honest. But aside from that, let me know your thoughts on Mr. Crying Rain Man in the comments down below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my video on Linny and Mono Elemental teams if you haven't yet. Till next time though, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.